I sometimes make assumptions about people and events and places. We all do. It's part of the way we reason our way through the day. If we didn't make some assumptions, we would never be able to move from point A to point B. Assumptions are often necessary. But when it comes to making assumptions and judgments about people, it's a very tricky thing. In the book, The Austere Academy, Lemony Snicket says, assumptions are dangerous things to make, and like all dangerous things to make, bombs, for instance, or strawberry shortcake, if you make even the tiniest mistake, you can find yourself in terrible trouble. I don't know about you, but I make assumptions which turn into judgments because I think I know what's going on in everybody's head. I'm that good. I can almost read your mind. And you thought you were the only one who could do that. We do think we know exactly what is going on, or we see something and then we add to it with our wonderful imaginations, and pretty soon we have a whole backstory in a feature film rolling through our brain. The danger comes when we start to believe what we have created, and it affects how we behave around the person whose story we have just imagined in our brain. For example, when I started attending my Silver Sneakers workout class, I encountered a whole room full of people that I had never met before. They were all strangers to me. I didn't know any of them. Now, some of them were very warm in their personality and in their approach to others, and others were a little bit more quiet. And I fought really hard to not make judgments and not make assumptions. I was going to take the high road. I was giving everyone the benefit of the doubt, and I was really open to reserving judgment on really all of the people in the class except one. She was so stern looking, and she never smiled, and she rarely engaged in conversations with any of us, and she looked like she thought she was better than all of us. That was a judgment. After a few weeks, I had become pretty well acquainted with most of the class members, and yet there was the one woman, the cold, callous one, the one without the heart or the sense of humor. See how we do that? Well, one day, I realized that I had never spoken to her or made any attempt to reach out to her. So you can imagine where I'm going with this story. So I walked over to her and I introduced myself, and she broke into the most beautiful smile I'd ever seen. We talked for several minutes and she warmed up instantly. In the ensuing weeks of class, her whole demeanor changed. She would wave to me from across the class. She would come over and make conversations with me. She initiated conversation with me. She knew my name. She wasn't cold or heartless at all. My judgment was all wrong. Perhaps she was shy. Perhaps she was in pain when I thought she was cold and callous. The reality is, any time I speculate about her or anyone else's behavior, I'm making an assumption and a judgment. So why do we do this? Why do we make assumptions and judgments? Dr. Maria Sirota writes, I think that it's part of human nature to base our understanding of other people and the world not just on the facts that we observe, but to a greater or lesser extent on what's going on inside of us, psychologically. In other words, we base our understanding of people and events on what we observe and what we know for a fact, but we also love making judgments based on our emotions and our beliefs and our expectations and our wishes. These psychological mechanisms then get confused with reality, and we think that the assumptions that we're making are reality, even though the assumptions aren't real at all. So, one technique to help us get back to what is really real is to ask ourselves a simple question. How do I know this? So back to my Silver Sneakers tribe. I decided that that woman that I told you about was cold and callous and stern and humorless. How did I know this? Well, I didn't. Unless I had witnessed her behaving in a cold, callous, stern, humorless manner, I was not basing my assumptions and judgments of her on any evidence or fact. I was making an incorrect assumption that I had just imagined. Maybe it was about something that I was experiencing. Maybe deep down inside, I was the cold, callous person at that moment. Too often, I am reminded by these words from the Talmud. We do not see things as they are. We see them as we are. In his book, The Four Agreements, Don Miguel Ruiz suggests that we grow up in our homes. As we grow up, we have been domesticated by a series of rewards and punishments. If we follow the rules of our parents, then we are seen to be good. If we don't follow their rules, then we feel and we are viewed and we are labeled bad. Now, Mr. Ruiz does not like the end result of that. He feels that we then enter adulthood with shame and guilt. And instead, he proposes we need to enter into 4 agreements that will result in healthier, happier living. The 4 agreements transcend the social conditioning that we had as children, and we learn then to discover our own personal power and live with clear intent and impeccability. The 4 agreements are a guide on how to achieve that. Now, in the past, I have spoken with you about 2 of those agreements. The first that I spoke about was be impeccable with your word. And then several weeks later, some time later, I followed up with do your best. As you might imagine, I bring all of this up today because another one of the 4 agreements is don't make assumptions. Of this agreement, Ruiz writes, the problem with making assumptions is that we believe they are the truth. We invent a whole story that's only truth for us, but we believe it. One assumption leads to another assumption. We jump to conclusions and we take our story oh so personally and we make these assumptions and we believe we're right about these assumptions and then we defend our assumptions. Ruiz would like us all to begin to break the habit of making assumptions so that we can have a better life. You want to know how? Ruiz tells us that we make assumptions that actually backfire on us because we're afraid to ask questions. If Miss Daisy had postponed her assumption about her chauffeur stealing the salmon and instead had waited until he got to work and asked him about the missing salmon, the whole issue would have been resolved. We don't ask the questions that we need to ask, and so then we fill in the gaps with assumptions. It's really a communication problem in many ways. Somewhere along the line, we got the idea that it's not safe. It's not safe to ask questions. It's better to just guess. We get so good at making assumptions that we ultimately assume that everyone sees life exactly the way we do. We assume that others think the way we think and feel the way we feel and judge the way we judge. And this is why we have a fear of being ourselves around others. Because we think that they're going to judge us and victimize us and abuse us and blame us just like we do ourselves. So even before others have a chance to reject us, we've already rejected ourselves. That's the way our mind works. A gentleman was parked in front of the mall wiping off his car. He had just come from the car wash and he was waiting for his wife to get out of work. Coming his way from across the parking lot would be a man that all of the rest of society would have labeled a bum. From the looks of him, he had no car, he had no home, he had no clean clothes and no money. And you know, there are times when you want to feel generous, but there's other times you just don't want to be bothered. So this was one of those I don't want to be bothered times for the gentleman. God, I hope he doesn't ask me for any money, this gentleman thought to himself. He didn't. He came and he sat on the curb in front of the bus stop, but he didn't look like he had any money to ride the bus. After a few minutes, he spoke. "It's a pretty car," the bum said. He was ragged, but he had an air of dignity about him. The gentleman said, "Thanks," continued wiping off the car. The bum sat there quietly as the gentleman worked. The expected plea for money never came. As the silence between the men widened, the gentleman suddenly blurted out, "Do you need any help?" He answered in 3 simple, profound words. "Don't we all?" We often look for wisdom in great men and women. We expect it from those of higher learning and accomplishments. We don't expect such wisdom from someone so common. The gentleman was feeling high and mighty and successful and important and oh, so far above a bum in the street until those 3 words hit him like a ton of bricks. Don't we all? There's very little that separates us. Yet our assumptions and our judgments about each other drive us far apart. We just never really know what's going on inside of the other person. And if we don't ask, we're left to make dangerous and usually faulty assumptions. If we could only put on some magic glasses and see inside the hearts and the minds of people around us, we would be so much more understanding and compassionate. If we saw others the way God sees us, we would not be so likely to make assumptions or snap judgments. Instead, we would see others with the love and the grace and the acceptance that God has for each one of us. We would truly be able to say, "I see you. I see you. And now I see there's no reason for me to judge you." Televangelist, pastor, and author Joel Osteen has been credited with these words. Your job is not to judge. Your job is not to figure out if someone deserves something. Your job is to lift the fallen, to restore the broken, and to heal the hurting. Let's try to keep those words in our head as we go through the next many weeks of our life. Have a great Sunday. Go in peace. Amen.